Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, from time to time, I dive into topics that I know are going to create a firestorm in the comment section. And I feel like this is probably going to be one of those videos. So I'm going to ask your indulgence up front in terms of please keep it civil. I don't want to have to monitor the comment section. Anything that's the least bit uncivil is probably going to get filtered out by YouTube anyway. But this is a video that was done by Matt Walsh a while back, and its title is The Emmett Till Story You've Heard Your Whole Life is a Lie. Now, if you know anything about my channel, you know that anytime I see someone taking on a story from history and prefacing it with everything you thought you always knew from history is a lie, and here's the real truth, I look at it with a side eye, because the reason we have history is because over time, people who have dedicated their lives to studying a topic and to teaching that topic have done so. Now, that doesn't mean that historians don't have biases. Absolutely, historians have biases. They have worldviews. They have angles that they're coming at. But if you take history as a whole, not just one individual historian here and there, if you take it all as a whole and you study it all, you're going to generally get a fairly accurate representation of what happened. Now, obviously, there are examples where large numbers of historians, the Lost Cause, for example, have settled on a particular narrative. So I'm not discounting that. But when someone comes along, especially someone who has a history of a particular point of view and says the Emmett Till story is a lie and here's the truth, yes, I'm going to come into this with a high degree of skepticism. If you're not familiar with the Emmett Till story, I'm sure he's going to get into it, but I encourage you to check it out. It's one of the most horrific stories from the civil rights era. A young black man who was brutally beaten to death and murdered because he was hitting on a white woman. So, I have no idea where Matt Walsh is going with this. Up front, for those of you who may be discovering this channel for the first time, I'm a historian. I generally stick to history and don't dive into politics. This obviously is a crossover, because even though this is a historical topic, Matt Walsh is a commentator who does a lot of politics. So I'm also somebody who is a traditional conservative, and by that I mean I'm like a George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush conservative, not whatever conservatives are today, or at least people on the MAGA side of things. That's not who I am. So I'm generally on the same side of the aisle as Matt Walsh, but got a lot of problems with the way he goes about tackling history. So it's going to be interesting. I would expect I'm going to push back pretty hard, and I may even get a little frustrated with this one, but let's dive in.
I mean, that's the whole point here, that, seeing through this kind of propaganda isn't easy when the propaganda was written more than 70 years ago, but we should try anyway, just to see what we might find out. Again, they're lying blatantly to our faces about events that we all experienced, and that in most cases were caught on video for the whole world to see. If they can and do lie about those sorts of things, imagine what kind of lies they can tell about events that none of us experienced, with no videos to go back and check to confirm the record.
Who's they?
Consider every supposed racist atrocity from decades or centuries ago, every quote-unquote innocent minority wrongfully persecuted by racist whites. I'm not saying that all of those stories aren't true. I'm saying that you can't assume that they are true. You have to go back with a skeptical eye, willing to question even the narratives that are most taken for granted, indeed, especially those narratives.
All right, so here's my question before we even dive into this topic, is that here's what we absolutely know for certain. We know that a teenage black boy was brutally beaten, murdered by people who ended up confessing to it at the end of their lives. That's not in question. That's not in doubt. We know that, right? So if the premise of this is that there was like, I don't know where he could go with this, right? Like, is he going to argue it didn't happen? Because we know it happened. So the only place he really could go with this then, as far as saying that the narrative that we've always heard is wrong, is to somehow imply that he deserved it, or that he did things that warranted what happened to him. Because otherwise, the narrative is a young black boy was brutally beaten and killed by adult white men because of his interaction with a woman. So I don't understand where he could go with this and what the motivation is here.
So let's go through a couple of examples now. Let's begin that process today. And let's start with the killing of a 14-year-old black boy named Emmett Till. Now, there's a good chance that you've almost certainly heard of Emmett Till. As the writer Steve Saylor has pointed out, he's not just a fixture in high school history textbooks. He was also center stage during the BLM hysteria of the past few years. Quote, Emmett Till, who was murdered in 1955, has been mentioned in 427 different New York Times articles over just the last 10 years. Emmett Till was mentioned more often in American books in 2022 than in any previous year. So as far as enduring myths go, Emmett Till is certainly up there.
Not a myth, though. This happened. It happened. Can we be clear on that? It happened. Whatever he's going to say about the details of how it happened, it absolutely happened. There's no myth here.
The basic narrative, which you've probably been told in school and by the media, is that Till was abducted and lynched by racist white people in Mississippi back in 1955. His crime, allegedly, was just simply whistling at a pretty white woman in a grocery store. Her name was Carolyn Bryant Donham. That was a serious violation of racial codes at the time, so Bryant, who was very offended, lied to her family and told them that Emmett Till had groped her. This is the story. And in response...
Okay, let's just, for a second, in case this is where he's going with it, assume that what she said was true. How does that change what happened afterwards? It doesn't. None of that justifies what happened to him.
Bryant's husband and his half-brother hunted the boy down a few days later, abducted him from a cabin, and brutally lynched him. The story was a major catalyst for the civil rights movement. Many decades later, in her 70s, Bryant admitted that she had lied about Emmett Till. Black activists then demanded that prosecutors charge her with a crime, and
which she should have
ultimately
been.
Bryant died before they could get their vengeance. That is the official narrative. A few years ago, when Bryant passed away, CBS News repeated this version of events verbatim on air. Watch.
Carolyn Bryant Donham, the white woman who accused Emmett Till of making advances towards her, has died. 14-year-old Emmett Till was kidnapped and brutally murdered by Bryant's then-husband and his half-brother in Mississippi in 1955 over the allegation. The two men were acquitted in his killing by an all-white jury, but later confessed in an interview. The case gained national attention after Emmett Till's mother allowed Jet magazine to take and publish photos of her son's...
Which took a tremendous amount of courage for her to do. And there's a backstory here involving Emmett Till's father that I have no doubt Matt Walsh is going to get into as part of his narrative here. So I'll save that for now. But it took a tremendous amount of courage for her to allow what she did. And that's a big reason why this story gained so much traction. Because he was not the only young black man who was killed during this era. There was a difference here because of the time and place when it happened, the circumstances in which it happened, and then the fact that his unrecognizable face was published for the world to see.
Mutilated body in an open casket. The horrific image shocked the nation and served as the catalyst for the civil rights movement. Years after Till's death, Donham admitted to fabricating parts of her story, although she was never charged with a crime.
Now, the problem here is that virtually every aspect of what that anchor just said is a fabrication. First of all, Emmett Till was not accused of merely making advances towards Bryant. That's an extremely, I guess we would say, sanitized and deliberately misleading way to present the story.
So we're going to go down the road of saying, well, listen, he did way more than what we're saying here, okay? So, yeah, I mean, listen, I know that the pushback on this against what I'm saying right now is going to be, no, you're reading into what he's saying. No. But here's the issue. I would have less of a problem with what he's doing here if throughout this process he could say, listen, if he'd said up front, listen, what happened to him was murder. It was awful. It should not have happened. These men were despicable human beings who should have been punished to the fullest extent of the law for what they did. If he'd frame it in the context of that and then say, listen, but there's probably more to the story, I could maybe digest this a little bit better. But when you basically gloss over all of that and say, listen, none of what you heard is true, this idea that he was some kind of poster boy for the civil rights movement, totally false. Let me tell you what he really did. It comes across very differently when you do it that way.
To Bryant's testimony in court, as well as her memoir, Emmett Till grabbed her hand and said, "How about a date, baby?" And when she tried to flee, Emmett Till followed her to the cash register, forcefully grabbed her waist and said, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" He told her she didn't need to be afraid and explained, quote, "I've been with white women before."
Okay, so according to whom was this said, right? This is what she accused him of, right? So are we going to start with the basis that she was being completely honest and therefore everything that happened afterwards is because this young uppity black kid did this?
Emmett Till did not leave the store until one of his friends entered and forcefully removed him. So this was, according to her, an attempted sexual assault. Not just...
No, that's not what that is. Was it wrong? Was it out of line? Let's assume that's exactly what happened. He said that, he grabbed her, okay, out of line? Yes. Attempted? Come on, no. Boy, that's a stretch, dude.
Just in advance. Now, these facts are obviously not flattering for Emmett Till, and for what it's worth, this behavior would not be out of character for the Till family.
There it is.
I think it's worth noting. Emmett's father was named...
So now, let me point out to you that, well, because his father was executed during World War II for similar things, well, I mean, the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Lewis Till, he enlisted in the Army during World War II to avoid going to prison for domestic violence. But Lewis Till's behavior did not change overseas. He was court-martialed for the murder of an Allied civilian during the Italian campaign, as well as the rape of 2 pregnant Italian women.
Yeah, so there are some questions about the efficacy of the ethics of this trial. I'm not suggesting that Lewis Till was innocent, but he didn't exactly get a fair trial. He was executed. He is buried in the Voisin American Cemetery in France. I visited his gravesite, actually. It was actually originally buried in the same plot, the same area where the only American executed for desertion during World War II was originally buried, Eddie Slovic. But it's where all the executed Americans from World War II are buried. It's a World War I cemetery. But listen, if we're going to start assuming that children are like their fathers in every case, man, that is a slippery slope. And man, if you want to start with me, if you want to start applying my parents' lives to me, I don't like where that leads.
Ultimately, he was found guilty and hanged. And incidentally, he had been incarcerated at the same military prison as the American poet Ezra Pound, who was jailed for treason. Pound even wrote a verse about Lewis Till, saying, "Till was hung yesterday for murder and rape with trimmings." Now, of course, the fact that Emmett Till's father was a domestic abuser and a rapist does not by itself demonstrate that Emmett Till did.
Right. So I'm going to tell you this stuff because I know that it's going to color your impressions of the man. But then I'll kind of hedge my bets and say, well, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Then why did you say it? Why did you say it except that you are trying to paint a particular picture?
Anything wrong, but if we're just being logical about it, it makes it more likely that he would...
It is completely 100% meaningless in the context of this story. The kid was abducted, brutally beaten, and murdered, okay? None of that has anything to do with what his father did more than a decade before.
Engaged in similar conduct, and taken together with Bryant's testimony, It's obviously context that makes her claim more credible.
No, it isn't.
Still, none of us
doesn't do anything to make her claim more credible. Zero. It does zero to make her claim more credible.
Can ever know for sure what really happened in that store that day. I mean, we really don't know for sure. But
we don't know for sure, but here, let me tell you what she said. Because, of course, of all the people involved in this case, we should certainly believe her.
Major lie about Emmett Till is what happened many years after his death. And the claim from the left and the media and activists is that Bryant later recanted her allegations that Emmett Till had physically assaulted her. They say that Bryant admitted in her dying years that she made the whole thing up, and she feels really bad about it. This is a core part of the story, and here's ABC repeating that claim.
Well, actually, I mean, the previous video clip that he showed had her saying, said that she recanted parts of the story, not the whole thing.
We're coming.
Reverend Wheeler Parker says that his Bible tells him to forgive. And he says that's what he's doing here.
Thank you.
Taking an overnight train to Mississippi with his wife, trying to make peace
Oh, my goodness.
with the murder of his cousin by a clan of racists.
If you dwell on it, you'll come out of it injured.
Nearly 70 years ago to this day. This is where the white woman who worked here claimed that his 14-year-old cousin had grabbed her, put his hands around her waist, and then told her he had slept with white women before. It was all over the daily papers with quotes from a young Wheeler Parker calling 21-year-old Carolyn Bryant a pretty lady, interviews he says he never gave. Bryant and her husband Roy owned the store. In 2007, she told a book writer that she lied, and then she died in 2023, never apologizing to the black families.
What you should notice about all these stories is how definitive they are. All the official versions of the Emmett Till story make the claim that beyond a shadow of a doubt, Bryant admitted she was wrong. Pretty much everyone accepts this version of events to the point.
Well, what they just said was that she's supposed to have said this to an author. I mean, if that's the narrative, they're not saying, they did not. He's framing this as them saying they are presenting this as the definitive argument. No, they didn't come out. They didn't say in what he just played, she definitely admitted that she lied. No, they gave the context. They said that in 2007, she said this to an author. Okay, I mean,
I think that just a couple of years ago, black activists tried to have the elderly woman thrown in prison. At the time, she was in her 80s and in failing health, but they didn't care.
Okay, what's the point? If she committed a crime and the statute of limitations hadn't, I'm guessing he probably would be okay if the roles were reversed, if someone in their 80s was arrested for a crime they committed 40 or 50 years earlier.
They went all the way to a grand jury, which rejected their claims. Watch.
Well, a grand jury in Mississippi today declined to indict the white woman whose accusations set off the lynching of Emmett Till nearly 70 years ago. Carolyn Bryant Dunham, now 88, initially claimed that Till made unwanted advances towards her at her family's grocery store. It led to the brutal torture and lynching of the 14-year-old. The prosecutor said the grand jury found insufficient evidence to charge Dunham.
So we're 8 minutes into his video, and so far the entire thing is about whether or not she told the truth about what Emmett Till did. And again, I ask the question, what's the point?
Here are just a few of the top comments on that video to give you an idea of the public reaction. Quote, "She's definitely going to hell." Quote, "You got to be kidding me. Don't worry. God knows what you did. We know what you did. One day you'll receive what you deserve. May God hold Emmett in his hands." Quote,
all I'm asking for Matt Walsh to say at some point in this video is, you know what? If she did lie, then she should have been held accountable for that. Like, he's not even open to the possibility that she lied or that she had any accountability in what happened to Emmett Till. He seems hell-bent on this notion that she was unfairly demonized, she told the truth, and by implication, then Emmett Till got what's coming to him.
It angers me when the truly evil live to a ripe old age. Now, those are the least deranged quotes I can find. It's all-out bloodlust over a dying woman in her 80s. And it's all based on a total fabrication. Bryant never recanted her allegation. The claim that she recanted was made by a historian named Timothy Tyson. He wrote a book in 2017 called The Blood of Emmett Till, in which he claimed that Bryant recanted her claims about Till in 2008, many decades after the incident. He recorded all of his interviews for the book, including his interviews with Bryant, standard practice for historians who are writing a book. So you'd think he'd be able to support his claims, especially a claim as explosive as that one. But it turns out that somehow Tyson's transcripts and audio recordings did not capture this bombshell admission. The FBI opened an investigation into Tyson's claims, since it would obviously be relevant to a criminal proceeding, even if the statute of limitations had expired, and they found no support for it whatsoever.
Okay, so we're back to it's all he said, she said, right? So we started with she claimed this is what Emmett Till did, which again, he has framed as being an attempted, I'm not going to say the words for fear of demonetization, but then somebody else claimed that she recanted parts of that story. So it just seems like Matt Walsh is hell-bent on believing her, but not believing anyone else around this story.
This is from the Washington Post. The article is from 2021. Quote, the Justice Department has closed the latest federal investigation into the 1955 lynching of Emmett Till in rural Mississippi. Federal authorities reopened the case 3 years ago after a new book reported that Bryant had denied in an interview that Till had made any advances. In theory, that could have meant she lied in decades-old court proceedings. Justice Department officials said Monday that when the FBI questioned Bryant about these allegations, about these alleged statements to the book's author, she said she did not make them, and the author's interview tape and transcripts do not show her making such statements. The book said Bryant told Tyson that Till had not come on to her sexually, a disclosure that directly contradicted her testimony 6 decades earlier, when she told a jury that Till grabbed her by the waist and uttered obscenities.
Okay, so let's assume for a second that she did not recant this. Let's assume for a second that her story, as presented originally in the testimony, was entirely true. Where do we go from here? What does that matter at this point?
In a statement, Justice Department said the FBI was unable to confirm Tyson's assertion that Donham had recanted her prior testimony. When agents interviewed her, she denied ever recanting and provided no new information, Justice Department statement said. Authorities concluded there was insufficient evidence to prove that she ever told the professor that any part of her testimony was untrue.
Okay, and it's quite possible that the guy writing the book made it up to sell books, or that she said it to him and said, listen, this is off the record, don't record this, and acknowledged it to him because she didn't want to implicate herself in a perjury trial or anything else. Either way, I just hope Matt Walsh brings this back to the context of, in the end, here's the context, right?
Although the professor represented that he had recorded 2 interviews with her, he provided the FBI with only 1 recording, which did not contain any recantation. A transcript of Tyson's other interview also did not contain the alleged recantation, official said. Separately, NBC News reported that, quote, but Donham denied to federal investigators that she lied in her testimony, a source of knowledge of the case said, and there were inconsistencies with statements made by Tyson. So to recap, to this day, they're lying to us about what the woman alleged Emmett Till did to her. They're lying by claiming the woman recanted her claim. She didn't. And they're burying a lot of information about the case, about Emmett Till, including the fact that his father was a rapist.
All right, I have nothing more to add to what I've already said.
And with all that in mind, you have to wonder if they're telling the truth about any aspect of this particular story.
Like, did he... Where are you going with this? Are you going to suggest he wasn't murdered?
I mean, once they're willing to fabricate important details in order to create a myth...
Listen, nobody's fabricating anything. What has been fabricated here? At most, we're talking about an author fabricating a recantation. That's it. What else has been fabricated in what he has presented here? No one's suggesting that Emmett Till didn't come on to this woman. No one's trying to say that he didn't do anything, right? You know, I agree with the idea that if he touched her, if he said certain things to her, that he was inappropriate and out of line. And the people who are framing what he did as making advances, could you suggest it was a little more than just simply advances like whistling at a white woman? Sure. But again, what's the context, right? Did any of this warrant and justify what happened next? And does any of it make any of that untrue?
The purposes of launching the civil rights movement, then there's no reason to trust anything they say about it.
Like what?
Now, does that mean that his killing was justified? No, obviously not. It was a brutal murder. We know that. There's really no disputing that.
Okay, so frame it that way. I don't understand why he has to, like, spend 10 minutes trying to support this woman's claims. 11 minutes into the video, we get a 10-second, I mean, he shouldn't have been murdered, but
the popular narrative about this case leaves out important details and blatantly lies about others.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't do that.
Disputing that either. Which makes you wonder about, what else about the story they aren't telling us. Nothing about the story or any of these kinds of stories can be taken on faith anymore. Doesn't mean they're all wrong. Any of these kinds of stories you learned in school, you should go back again and check. You cannot assume that any of them are entirely true, and many of them.
Nothing he has said in this video so far has changed anything about the story. The only point he has here is that the author may have made that up, or at the very least, the author doesn't have any evidence that she recanted that. None of that changes the rest of the story.
That might be entirely wrong. And in fact,
all that does is take us back to where the story was in the 1950s, which is we have a white woman who said that this guy came on to her, may have even been a little forceful in coming on to her, may have even warranted, in the modern era, if this had happened, there probably could have been an investigation, maybe some kind of an assault charge that could have resulted. And that would have been perfectly acceptable. But he was never going to get that kind of justice in the South.
Lynchings in general are one of the most inflammatory aspects of American history, and therefore nobody wants to be honest about them. There's a hysteria about lynchings that led to a federal anti-lynching bill just a few years ago, if you remember that. Even though no black person has been lynched in this country at all in living memory, white people have certainly been attacked for their skin color, as we saw at the top of the show.
Wait. Look, did you hear how he framed that? No black person has been lynched in living memory, but white people have been attacked for their skin color. All right, so he's talking about two very different things. He's talking about a very specific kind of attack with black people, but then he talks about just attacks in general on white people. Let's compare apples to apples. Have black people been attacked for their skin color and living memory? Absolutely. Have white people been attacked for their skin color and living memory? Absolutely. Apples to apples.
But there have been no anti-black lynchings at all in many, many decades. And, there's this idea that if you object to any of the propaganda about lynching, then you must.
So I'm going to pause for just a minute here, because I feel like so far all I've been doing has been reacting to what Matt Walsh has been saying without offering any counter to what he's said, just to give some context to the story. So from what we've been presented so far, it's easy to assume that what we basically are left with is that we have this woman, Bryant, and we have Emmett Till in the store, and we basically have her word, and there's no other witnesses, there's no other evidence. And no investigation was able to determine whether or not she was lying or telling the truth or what really happened, and that we'll never really know. But the fact is, there is a lot of other evidence. And, Matt Walsh has been referring to FBI investigations. So let's go down that road. There were other people with Emmett Till, at least two. Both of them said that they didn't see anything inappropriate, that all they saw him do was whistle, and that even that whistle just freaked them out because they knew right away that him whistling at a white woman in the context of the time and place in which they were was dangerous. So they acknowledged that's what happened. In fact, one of them said it scared us half to death. You know, we were almost in shock. We couldn't get out of there fast enough because we had never heard of anything like that before. A black boy whistling at a white woman in Mississippi? No. He said the Ku Klux Klan and Night Riders were part of our daily lives. And then during the murder trial itself, Bryant testified that Till grabbed her hand while she was stocking candy, said, "How about a date, baby?" After she freed herself from his grasp, Till followed her to the cash register, grabbed her waist, and said, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" Bryant said she freed herself. Till said, "You needn't be afraid of me, baby." Used one unprintable word, and then said, "I've been with white women before." Bryant also alleged that one of Till's companions came into the store, grabbed him by the arm, and ordered him to leave. But decades later, one of the witnesses challenged the account given by Bryant and said at the trial that Wright claims he entered the store Wright is the companion, entered the store less than a minute after Till had been left alone inside with Bryant, said he saw no inappropriate behavior and heard no lecherous conversation. Wright said Emmett Till paid for his items and we left the store together. In their 2006 investigation of the case, the FBI noted that a second anonymous source who was confirmed to have been in the store at the same time as Till and his cousin supported that account. So someone who didn't want to be named, who was present, confirmed that what Simeon Wright said happened is how things went down. So this is the FBI's own investigation. So if we're going to take the FBI at face value for what happened in terms of whether or not Carolyn Bryant recanted or not, then let's also take them at face value in saying they investigated and they have a source who was present, an eyewitness who said that Carolyn Bryant was lying about what happened, okay, as were Till's companions. So other than Carolyn Bryant, anybody who was present says that she was making that up, that none of that beyond a whistle happened, okay? So if we're gonna go down this road, Matt Walsh, let's look at the evidence, okay? But again, none of this changes anything. The end result was still that he was beaten and murdered. Another little bit of context before we get back to the video is that after this happened, after the boys left the store, Carolyn Bryant went out to her car and grabbed a gun that she had in the car and took it back with her. Her husband was on a shrimp hauling trip at the time and didn't return right away. When he came back, Carolyn Bryant did not tell her husband about it because she said, she told the FBI she didn't tell her husband because she was afraid that he would assault Emmett Till if she told him. He actually found out from someone else who frequented the store about what happened. He aggressively questioned several young black men who entered the store. That evening, Bryant, with a black man named J.W. Washington, approached a black teenager walking alongside a road. He ordered Washington to seize the boy, put him in the back of a pickup truck, and took him to be identified by a companion of Carolyn's who had witnessed the episode with Till. I'm going to guess this might be the same person who was the anonymous source later who said that nothing more than a whistling happened. Okay, let's continue.
Must endorse the murder of innocent black people, but that's obviously not true. And all that matters is the truth.
So he's been talking in the context of lynching. The last verified actual lynching within the definition of lynching of a black man happened in 1981. Everything that's happened since doesn't fall under that strict definition. But just, again, context.
That's all we're saying about all these stories. What actually happened? What is the truth? You're saying some things that aren't true. I want to know what the actual truth is. That's all.
Okay, so why aren't you presenting the entire story then? Why aren't you presenting everything I just presented? If we're after the truth, let's look at all of it. Let's acknowledge all of it. The parts that we like, the parts that we don't like. Instead of just trying to push back against one tiny sliver of this bigger story. Because that, to me, sounds like you're pushing a narrative and not the truth.
Now, the popular narrative about lynching today is that it was a form of murderous violence inflicted by white people on black people for racial reasons. Now,
absolutely 100% true.
That those kinds of lynchings have occurred in American history. Not any time recently, which is what made that anti-lynching bill so ridiculous, not to mention the fact that lynching was already very much illegal anyway.
And I'll agree with him on that. I've always been concerned about the idea of hate crime specializations when it comes to things like murder, as if somehow a crime is worse, that your motive was based on them being gay or being black, than if you murdered them because of jealousy or because you wanted to take their money or you wanted to cover up another crime. That bothers me.
And yet even Tuskegee University, which is a historically black university, admits that between 1882 and 1968, more than, this is according to their tally, more than 27% of lynching victims were white. Now, if lynching...
Okay, so first of all, we cut off the period where most of the worst anti-black violence happened, which is in the 2 decades after the American Civil War during Reconstruction. So we're going to start at 1882, which is a very convenient date to do that. But you're still saying that 73% of people who were the victims of racial violence are black.
Was a form of racial violence, then why would a significant percentage of the victims be white? The answer is that historically, lynching was a form of mob justice. In the vast majority of cases, the victim, white or black, or any race, was accused of committing a serious crime. Now, often...
Okay, what is the context of this in terms of, I mean, now what it sounds like you're doing is you're making a direct connection between Emmett Till's murder and the justification of lynching, which is, well, they were a criminal anyway. This is really disturbing to me that this is a part of the context of this video.
We can't know exactly how often, but they were indeed guilty of committing the crime.
Okay, so listen, Mr. I've got a Cairo on my arm, which represents Jesus Christ. Are we now going to justify mob violence rather than due process and using the law appropriately? Is that where we're going with this now?
The important point is that lynching was not an exclusively racial form of violence.
No, it wasn't. But it was an overwhelmingly racial form of violence in the context of the post-Civil War South. Yes, was there a lot of lynching, especially out west, of white people? Yeah. By other white people? Yeah.
Had nothing to do with race at all. I mean, we can confidently say that most of the 27% of white victims, assuming that percentage is not an undercount, which is a very massive assumption, but we can assume that they were not lynched, for racial reasons.
No, they weren't. But we can assume that the majority of blacks who were lynched by white mobs in the South, that there definitely was a racial component. Both things can be true at the same time. Don't tell me that because the 27% of people who faced lynching were white weren't because of race, that therefore means that all of the 73% who were non-white were also not because of race. That is not, I mean, critical thinking skills, folks. Come on. Critical thinking here.
Does it make sense then to assume that every black victim was lynched for racial reasons?
Not every, but here's what we're doing now. I'm going to bring in the Bible a little bit here. There's the story in the book of Genesis where you have Satan tempting Adam and Eve, right? Or tempting Eve. And he says to her, did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Well, no. What God said was you can't eat from this one tree in the garden. But he reframed the question to make it sound like God was saying something he didn't. So what he's saying here is, were every black person who was lynched, was it because of race? No. That doesn't mean that most cases weren't race. Like, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Of course it doesn't. In a certain significant percent of cases, they were lynched for the same reason whites were lynched, because they had committed or were accused of committing a crime.
Not okay. Doesn't make it okay. Well, okay, so they committed a crime, therefore they deserved for a mob to break in and murder them before they could have a trial to see whether or not they were even guilty.
And lynching was not invented in 1882, by the way. It had been used all through the early history of the United States and before that. It happened during colonial times, too. We don't have any data, as far as I could find, on the racial makeup of the victims in the early 19th century and prior to that. But there's good reason to suspect that a large number of them, perhaps even a majority, perhaps even a large majority.
So he's making all kinds of assumptions. Well, we don't have the data, but we can assume that presents what he wants to be true in this case. Mr. Let's go with the facts and let's get down to the bottom of the evidence has no problem just speculating about everything here.
Were white. And this wasn't just mob justice. Sometimes it was. Sometimes mobs of angry townsfolk banded together to kill some alleged wrongdoer. And sometimes they would do
Man, I
that.
hope you're never alleged to have done something you didn't do, because you're making an argument here for people taking matters into their own hands.
Even though they had a court system and jails that could have brought the alleged criminal
Right.
to justice
And
in
it was
a
wrong.
civilized and constitutional way. But sometimes lynching was less a case of mob justice and more a case of frontier justice. Large swaths of the American territory through much of its early history didn't really have a functioning court system, so there wasn't much you could do with murderers, rapists, and
Show me examples of large swaths of people being executed in context of places and times where there was no functioning court system. Show me that evidence.
thieves in those cases, but execute them quickly. And, sometimes they would leave their bodies hanging from a tree as a warning to anyone who might think of committing similar crimes.
Now you're just making up anecdotal stories without presenting any facts. If you're going to make an argument like that, especially in the context of a video about what happened to Emmett Till, bring receipts.
It was brutal and ugly, but sometimes brutal and ugly options were the only ones available.
No, they weren't.
Maybe you can think of a better way to deal with like a murderer if you're living in a frontier town and there's no court system and no jail and you've got someone who just murdered someone or is a rapist. What are you supposed to do?
How do you know they murdered someone or they're a rapist without due process, without a functioning court system? You're just going to assume it's true because someone said so? Like a woman in a store saying, this is what he did to me?
Again, we have a story that is much more complicated than the one told today by the media and the education system. Lynchings happened for hundreds of years.
There's nothing complicated about what happened to Emmett Till. Nothing. Nothing complicated about it.
A huge number of them had nothing to do with race. Some of them were actually justified.
Here's a bunch of other stories that have nothing to do with this specific account that we're talking about that I can use to maybe try and explain why this did not happen the way you think it did. Come on.
Necessary. Some of them were not. Some of them were racial killings. Some of them were not. We can't possibly know what the percentages look like. We can
know that Emmett Till's case was 100% because he was a 14-year-old black kid who was considered to have way overstepped his bounds with a white woman, regardless of what did or did not happen. And the evidence by all of the eyewitnesses say she was lying. There's no person, nothing I saw in any of the FBI investigations that indicate that her version of events was verified by anyone else. The only people who were present say, no, what she said happened isn't what happened.
Get down into a pie chart. And so instead, the popular narrative has simplified the pie so that the racial killings are the whole pie. And now lynching has
And now
become
you're trying to imply that they weren't any of the pie.
a symbol of anti-black racism. But historically, the concept of lynching did not have that automatic racial connotation. It's only relative.
Sure, if you're looking at places and times outside of the Jim Crow South, you can say, you know what, historically, lynching hasn't always been like it was there. You know what? Historically, America's wars haven't always been about civil wars. Historically, we fought against other countries. But you know what? From 1861 to 1865, we fought a civil war in which the North fought against the South, right? Historically, there are times and places where lynching had nothing to do with racism. In the post-war South, 1865 to the 1960s, up to 1981, in that context, lynching very often was racially motivated.
Recently, that the noose has become this like racially charged symbol.
No, that's not recent.
But it should tell you something that Literally every prominent case of a racist noose being left somewhere to intimidate black people at any point this century has turned out to be a hoax. All of them have been hoaxes.
I don't know all of the details of every situation, but I can think of a few prominent ones. There was the one with the NASCAR thing. There was the Smollett case. Yes, those were absolutely hoaxes.
And maybe that should tell you something. One of the most powerful scenes, for my money, in the miniseries Lonesome Dove, one of the great pieces of, of television or film ever made. But one of the most powerful scenes is when Tommy Lee Jones's character lynches a group of thieves and murderers, including one of them who was a former friend. All of them were white. Now, it's fiction, obviously.
And guess what that makes his character? A murderer, because he did that extrajudicially. Didn't have the authority to do that. Did it outside of the scope of the law. You want another powerful scene? Watch The Free State of Jones and watch the portrayal of the post-war South. There's a scene for you. All right, we're going to wrap it up right there. Just as I said several times throughout the video, let's just remember that when we are trying to present a fresh look at something, and I'm not opposed to the idea of taking a deeper dive into some of these topics that have had a traditional narrative to see if there might be more to it. But let's not swing so far to the other side that we give ammunition to people who want to try and claim something pretty awful, which I'm left feeling from this story. So I don't really have any more to add than that. The only thing I ask is that as we discuss this stuff, let's keep it civil. Let's disagree passionately, but do so in such a way that doesn't bring out the worst of us, but rather brings out the best of us. Thanks for watching.